Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking a look at the best Total War Warhammer 3 trailer so far. There's no other way to put it if you ask me. This one is super slick. It shows off Slaanesh and Nurgle both, and it does it with tremendous style. If you want more of these types of trailer analysis videos and stuff on the channel, please don't hesitate to let me know by leaving a like and a comment down below. But for now, let's not wait any longer. Let's dive into the trailer first and the screenshots right after.
Fate is fickle.
So close, never enough.
He wants more. We all wanted more.
Alright man, this guy's face is a reflection of mine. That's how I feel. This is such a great trailer, honestly. It is the most stylish. It is the most, I think, packed as well. Just chock full of information. Right off the bat, the cold open is a solid 10 out of 10. Now, here we've got our old man advisor from the first two games. He's made periodic appearances in the marketing for Game 3 as well, and here he's sort of the driving force of the story in this trailer. The voice says, "Come then, exile. What you seek is within. Will you share their fate?" I'm not sure if I want to dive too deep into what might turn out to just be a couple of throwaway lines, but I wonder if we're finally getting a hint at some campaign story arcs, or just the precursor to the campaign itself. Now, in previous games, we had the simple conquer your sworn enemy storylines, then we got the Vortex storyline for Game 2, but every DLC faction kind of had their own thing, and this time around, maybe we're getting everybody sort of have their own storyline campaign right off the bat. Are we instead maybe getting more information about the ancient figure who desires nothing less than to wield supreme power? The Steam page has mentioned that since day one, basically, and maybe we're finally sort of getting a peek behind the curtain. Either way, like I said, I don't want to talk too much about this because it could just be some throwaway lines as a driving force for this trailer's story, but just something to think about, I suppose. It looks like we're at the ruins of a pleasure palace of sorts, a meeting place for Slaaneshi cultists, perhaps, where they play board games and drink soda. This is a very PG representation of Slaaneshi activities on screen, apart from where this guy's head gets pulled off, but you can let your imagination run wild with regards to what kind of stuff went down here. Everything went down here. But I'm getting ahead of myself. His tome is mentioned as a symbol of his pact with the Architect, our buddy Tzeentch. I'm sure the fact that there is an anthology book called Architect of Fate set in the 40k universe is just a coincidence. They share chaos gods and demons after all, but if I were wearing my tinfoil hat, I'd say this is a wink and a nod about the inevitable 40k Total War game that they're probably already in pre-production on. The voices continue to talk about fate being fickle, and our old man here wanting more, at which point we get a little jump scare here and our first glimpse at a Daemonette. We saw one in stone earlier, but this one is in flesh. Again, we get a barely intelligible voice, and this time it's saying, "You answered the call of the flesh, only to be enslaved by it. But in his embrace we are not afraid. We are reborn as death." So, the change in voice, the green glow, the fidget spinner of Nurgle, and the reference to death and rebirth gives us a shift to Nurgle now, I think. So is this a scene of a great betrayal, perhaps? Worshippers of Slaanesh turning to Nurgle? Or is this just showing Slaanesh taking an L at the hands of Nurgle in battle? Either way, we flash over to a vision of the battle between demons of both gods, and this is where the meat of the trailer actually is. Daemonettes of Slaanesh for a flash before we return to our old man, surrounded by the infestations of Nurgle, though these tentacles showing some real daddy Nurgle vibes rather than grandpa Nurgle, if you catch my drift. And this shot is absolutely packed. We have the centerpiece as the Great Unclean One. I suspect we might get two variants, a regular unit as a single monstrous beast, which is the one you see here, and then the Exalted Great Unclean One. That'll probably be a generic lord, and we'll actually, I think, get a look at it later on when we're taking a look at the screenshots at the end of this video. Now, this lines up as well with the legendary lord we see later in the trailer too. The one thing that throws me off a little here is that I've always seen these guys with their guts falling out. But here we have teeth instead. I'm not sure if there's a reason for that. It's possible that it's a matter of ratings. Guts hanging out probably prevents that E for everyone rating that Total War games strive for. So I wonder if the Blood Pack DLC will include changes to these models, or maybe I'm missing something here. If anybody's more familiar with fantasy Nurgle tabletop models, please enlighten me if I am missing something, but I've literally only ever seen them with their innards hanging out of their bellies. So this took me by surprise. It's not the end of the world, it's not a big deal, but I am just curious about it because I've, again, only ever seen them done one way, and I can imagine ratings being a reason to avoid that visual over here, and I'm just curious if there could be another explanation. Anyway, like I said, it's a minor point that just stood out to me. Great Unclean Ones are extremely powerful demons, and despite their look, they actually embody the positive vibes of Nurgle. Always cheerful, always wanting the best for their children, gregarious, and patriarchal in their love. I imagine we'll see that sword put to good use with a great deal of damage output on the topic of being gregarious and loving. And I'd like to see attacks from the demons of Nurgle actually cause something beyond a simple poison status effect. I feel like that's all we're going to get, but I do hope to see them cause maybe an extra bit of decay, like the slightest bit of damage over time perhaps, or corrosion to armor and things like that. Either way, I suspect solid armor-piercing splash damage out of this massive sword, and we're not swinging that. I think we'll see the noxious bile as either a fancy animation, just while in melee, or more likely as a bound ability magic missile with a short range that causes that poison effect as well. I suspect we're going to see a very resilient individual here, possibly with some damage reflection to show how attacking something so full of pus covered in boils and disease could be dangerous. And heck, I wouldn't be surprised if there's an aura of leadership debuffs beyond the fear and terror. Maybe a drop in melee stats to reflect the distracting stench of it all. You'll see me mention that a couple of times with some of these bigger beasts out of Nurgle's corner, because I feel it just kind of makes sense, you know. You can see the stank here, right? I think further down the line, we see the ability to summon a host of Nurglings as well. Now, this might just be a shot for the trailer, and it might not reflect actual in-game stuff at all, but I can see this being a direct damage bound ability with a few shared animations across different unit types being targeted. If not that, we're almost certainly getting the ability to summon a unit of Nurglings at the very least. Again, that's sort of their thing, the Great Unclean Ones. So one way or another, I suspect we'll be able to bring Nurglings out on the field using the Great Unclean Ones. Apart from that, though, we can expect to see the lore of Nurgle, as well as the lore of Death on the Great Unclean Ones, and their exalted variants too. And you can learn more about the lore of Nurgle in my Magic Lores video that I'll link at the end of this video and in the description down below. The exalted variant will be tougher, naturally, and we can expect even more souped up damage output with perhaps an additional unique ability or two. We'll talk a bit more about them afterwards when we're looking at the relevant screenshot. Either way, I think they'll be lumbering creatures, very slow, and you can kind of see that speed, or the lack thereof, in the trailer too. We've also got a Chaos spawn of Nurgle in the background, but to the front we have the adorable little Nurglings. I imagine they'll be relatively cheap and effective at harassing enemy units as they scuttle about, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them maybe carrying a Herald of Nurgle around from time to time as well, on top of a palanquin, of course. Above them are the plague drones of Nurgle buzzing about, able to fly around and bring their poison damage to bear. They'll be some of the faster troops on the battlefield for Nurgle, I imagine, and they'll be sort of doubling as a mount option, as we'll see in just a bit. The Beasts of Nurgle are a nasty bunch, also with poison attacks, which you can kind of expect to see across the board, I think. We're going to see a bit of a theme. They'll also have a slow rate of movement, which is, I think, also a bit of a theme for Nurgle's army. And I think they might come in with their Slime Trail ability, which would remove any effects from being flanked. It's possible that Creative Assembly will bring this over from Troy, where we saw that there were units who were immune to flanking attacks and the leadership debuffs and stuff that came from them. So it's possible that they will try and pull that ability and apply it to some units over here, and of course the Slime Trail ability does make sense for the Beasts of Nurgle. Decently armored and resilient enough, I'm curious if they'll find a way to include the personality in battle. Again, a very fun descriptor. They're typically described as easily excited puppies, overly friendly, and just seeking constant attention. Nurgle is a very fun chaos god, and his units are all very fun as well in their attitudes and personality, despite how they, might look. So I'm curious to see how much of that carries over, not just in animation, but in game mechanics as well. And we'll see, of course, all in due time. Finally, though, at the back, we have a very, very blurry look at, I think, a Plague Toad with a Plague Bearer atop it. If so, we're looking at some monstrous cavalry, probably a small unit, just as in a handful of entities within the unit. I mean, it's physically going to be quite large. I suspect it'll be relatively quick moving, with all the benefits of the Plague Bearer and Plague Toad combined. It's also possible that this particular Plague Bearer is a Herald of Nurgle instead. Potentially wizards with the Lore of Nurgle or the Lore of Death variants. The Herald of Nurgle will likely have poison damage like literally everything else in this roster, and they'll probably be decent and resilient melee combatants too. The Plague Toad mount option seems to be on full display, but I wonder if they can mount the Plague Drones as well. I suspect we'll see them on foot by default, perhaps with the option to come in on a palanquin carried by Nurglings, followed by the Plague Toad, and then the Plague Drones as their final mount option. Alright, after a bunch of sexy Nurgle units, let's take a look at some of these nasty Slaanesh ones. The Fiends of Slaanesh have been absolutely excellently executed. The way they move so close to the ground with that slight left and right sway to their movement is very unnerving, and it's equally as terrifying as the one that's bounding forward like an ape right behind it. I really like how they've done the Fiends here. They could have very easily animated them like Centaurs, upright backs and all that, but no. We have something quite interesting to look at instead, and I really hope they move like this in-game as well, and that this isn't just for the trailer. It really, when I watch this over and over again, it kind of makes my skin crawl, and I like it. I like it a lot. It's got that, insect vibe going. It's great. Look, it's great. I love it. You can tell immediately that they're extremely fast just from this momentary glimpse, and while I expect they won't be able to withstand a beating, I can see a decent charge bonus and some good hit and run tactics from them perhaps. Those blades are formidable weapons, and as we'll see later, the tail is too. So maybe some splash damage from the back with some armor piercing all around. If they have their soporific musk, they should also reduce enemy melee skills while slowing down their attacks too, and that can make up for a lack of armor. The attacks from the Stinger can supposedly put a bloodletter into a coma, so maybe we'll see a bound ability that actively uses the tail and causes a major speed debuff or major stat reductions as well. They could be very, very helpful from a utility perspective and from a support perspective, so I'm curious to see exactly how these guys actually play. Either way, these guys are looking real slick, and again, I gotta mention it again, the animation is really cool. It really got me. When it first popped up on screen, I was just like, whoa. And I try not to pause in my first viewing of the trailer, but this was the closest I'd come where I was like, okay, I gotta watch that again, because it's really good. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted here. Moving on, behind them are the Daemonettes of Slaanesh, able to move pretty quickly themselves, but again, very flimsy despite a decent melee attack and defense stat. I'm not sure if we'll get an area of effect debuff from their presence, but a minor one that pops from time to time could be interesting. They're supposed to be rather alluring after all, and let's not forget, this is demonic levels of alluring. This isn't just like somebody who looks attractive on the battlefield. This is like something that, deep-seated within you is supposed to draw your attention. Much like the demon levels of stank I'm expecting from Nurgle and all of his demons, I'm expecting some, top-level alluringness, if that's even a word, from the Daemonettes, for example. So I'm just curious. It doesn't have to be there, but I am curious if they decide to implement it. Either way, the other thing I'm curious about is if we'll see the equivalent of a Strider trait on the Daemonettes, just to show how gracefully they can glide across terrain. And it would help make them a bit more terrifying to deal with as well, when you can't rely on, terrain debuffs for infantry to try and help slow them down or beat them up. They'll also be the basis of the Herald of Slaanesh, a bit more resilient, but not by too much, and a bit more capable in melee as well, though they come as spellcaster variants too, typically with the lore of Shadows and the lore of Slaanesh as options. Again, the video linked in the description, and at the end of this video, we'll talk more about the new lores of magic being added to the game. The Seekers and Seeker Chariots of Slaanesh will likely be the mount options for the Herald, and we'll see them in action in just a second. Alright, once more, lots to see here. The Seekers are actually the combo of the Daemonette and the steed upon which they ride, but I don't think we'll see any unmounted steeds of Slaanesh in this trailer, outside of when they're leading a chariot, I mean. Either way, the Seekers are here, and you can expect them to be among the fastest Slaaneshi units, with poison attacks and naturally causing fear and terror. Again, minimal resilience with next to no armor, but decent melee stats and a solid charge bonus would make them great hit-and-run cavalry. The Seeker Chariots of Slaanesh are going to be anti-infantry, most likely, and they'll be extremely fast, and I think they might cause poison damage as well. The Steeds of Slaanesh are capable of doing poison damage themselves, if memory serves, so there's no reason that there shouldn't be a transfer of that over here. Now, we don't just see the Seeker Chariots here, though. We actually see the Hellflayers, too. I expect they'll be similar to the Seeker Chariot, though maybe with a higher melee attack stat, able to stay stuck in combat for just a little bit longer. We also have a Keeper of Secrets at the back here, carrying a sword and board. These will be some of the more resilient warriors on the Slaaneshi roster, and I suspect they'll come in as a regular monstrous unit, as an exalted variant for generic Lord options, and as a legendary Lord pick too, which is what I think we'll see closer to the end of this trailer. I think we'll see melee versions as well as spellcasting versions with the lore of Shadows and the lore of Slaanesh on hand, though those variants might be exclusive to the exalted versions. The shield on this melee version we're seeing here will likely count as a silver level shield in terms of game mechanics, protecting against shots from the front arc, and while I expect the blades to be armor piercing with a decent bit of regular damage too, I wouldn't be surprised if the claws are equally terrifying on a variant without a sword, if they exist. Whether the Living Whip will show up as a bound ability or not is yet to be seen, but either way, I am very excited to see the Keeper of Secrets in action. Here we can see Plague Bearers very clearly riding atop the Plague Drones and atop Plague Toads as well. I imagine the Plague Bearers' Plague Swords will cause magic damage as well as poison damage to whoever they hit. I imagine as well that they'll have similar effects when on foot, and you can see them on foot in the prior shot here. I wouldn't be surprised if Plague Bearers have regeneration and as such a weakness to fire too, and since we're actually looking at this shot, I should probably point out that these guys over here are probably the Forsaken of Nurgle, Nothing too crazy going on over here, just a different color scheme, maybe some poison attacks, and that's about it. But with them aside, let's take a moment to admire Kugath, Plaguefather. Always most willing to enter the mortal realm, Kugath enjoys concocting new diseases as much as he hates the dwarfs in particular because of their resilience to them. You can't see it here too clearly, but his palanquin is held up by a bunch of little Nurglings, and those Nurglings are more than just a mobility aid. Kugath uses them as ammunition from time to time. I would love to see Kugath be able to use them as ranged ammunition, but suffer losses to his movement speed as he tosses more and more of them as ammo. But jokes aside, I'm like, that's like a 30% joke. I'm mostly serious about that suggestion, but that aside, he only comes atop his palanquin with no variance, and he can use his spells from the lore of Nurgle while also being decent in melee and passable from range. Again, he throws those Nurglings, I'm not joking about that. His attacks cause poison damage, though again, I'd like to see a souped up version of it, and he also has a slime trail that again prevents flanking from having any effects on him. Fear and terror are to be expected, and it's possible that we'll see a regenerative effect on him, as well as some AoE debuffs to anybody that's battling near him. Again, can you imagine the smell? If I recall the rules correctly, he has a ranged attack that involves firing plague-ridden Nurglings that pop out of his body from time to time, and I think that's probably separate from the Nurglings that he scoops up from under his palanquin to fling, but, you know, maybe they'll be merged into one thing for the purpose of this game. The shot is supposed to be armor-piercing. It has a decent range, about middling range, I'd say, and it's got some decent damage output too, and it could be, again, a bound ability or just simply a ranged attack option. I will say, though, as impressed as I am with everything else in this trailer, Kugath seems like he could use a few more minutes in the oven. His model seems surprisingly low-res, considering the sheer size of it. The boils are very flat, and you can see the rather sharp edges on what should be a rather bulbous form. Does stand out compared to the visual fidelity of everything else in this trailer. Do I need 100 polygons for every bulb and boil on his body? No. It just stands out, that's all I'm saying. There's also this frame over here where the toad back here is clipping through the Plague Bearer under the watchful eye of some Chaos Furies of Nurgle, so more units confirmed back there as well, but no surprise, I think we were all expecting the Chaos Furies for all of the demon factions, and I think the same goes for the Soul Grinders. We don't see a Soul Grinder of Nurgle in this trailer, but I think it's safe to assume that there will be a Soul Grinder of Nurgle in the base game right at launch. Slaanesh cultists here being swarmed by Nurglings. Again, I'm not sure if this amazing animation is actually in the game or not. It could be a direct damage bound ability, it could be a spell, it could be an actual Nurgling sync kill animation, but it's absolutely hilarious, and I adore it. Alright, Buddy needs a change of pants after watching those animations, because hot damn, they were spectacular. And these look like Slaaneshi cultists with shields and Daemonette arms, which is a cool blend. You can see they're not just carrying blades, but have them as gifts of Slaanesh mutated onto their bodies. The shields will provide probably bronze level protection from the front arc, and the weapons themselves might be decently armor piercing, perhaps. I expect these guys will be pretty flimsy overall, but pretty cheap to field too. I'm not sure if they'll be, you know, worthy of armor-piercing damage output, but those claws are supposed to be rending, right? They're supposed to be pretty deadly claws, so there might be a balance there where, again, they're flimsy, just like everything else on the Slaaneshi roster, but they get in there, they cause some damage, and then they're out, by which I mean they're probably dead. They could also just be a good way to draw ranged fire while closing gaps. They have those shields of theirs after all, and those shields could help distract from the Daemonettes and stuff who are running up without any shields, who are equally flimsy, so that could be a possibility as well. But, the coolest goddamn entry we have seen from any legendary lord yet. Look, transforming into a dragon during a freefall has nothing on a leaping, slicing pirouette through the sky. Ladies and gentlemen, N'Kari is an absolute baller, coming in with claws and sword and style. N'Kari has an interesting history. Enslaved by Malekith at some point, with claims to have lain with Morathi many times, potentially even being the true father to Malekith, though that might just be Slaaneshi lies. There are some interesting connections between N'Kari and the Dark Elves, but I guess we'll have to wait to see them if we ever do. Either way, a souped-up keeper of secrets, I suspect we'll see access to a blend of the lore of Slaanesh and the lore of Shadows, alongside an extremely high speed, some great splash damage-causing attacks, armor-piercing damage, and of course, fear and terror, all the usual elements. Hold on, can we just watch that again? Oh my god, it's so sick. I really like this animation. And I think we'll see it on the battlefield as well, just as like a part of the charge, with like an immense charge bonus. I have the knowledge you crave, says the voice, but all pleasure has a price. Man, honestly, such a packed trailer, and I loved the narrative elements just as much as the units and the animations. I thought this was a brilliant trailer with a lot to look at and a lot to talk about, but that's not all for today. While our first screenshot simply gives us a better look at Kugath, some Nurglings, and some great Unclean One variants alongside the plague drones in the sky, our second screenshot here is a bit more interesting. We see the plague toads with a very happy plague bearer riding it. We see regular plague bearers on foot, and I think we also see an exalted plague bearer here. They could instead be Bile Trolls or Chaos Trolls of Nurgle, but either way, they look like they'll be more powerful versions of the Plague Bearers with regeneration and the fire weakness to go with it. The bell gives some serious Bring Out Your Dead vibes, and I wonder if it'll actually play an active component or if it's just visual. Considering this one back here doesn't have it, I think it's just some visual variation, at least for this unit. But on the topic of bells that might actually have some mechanical function, behold the size of this one being swung around by the exalted Great Unclean One. They'll have similarities, of course, to the base Great Unclean One, but with greater damage output and attack capabilities, and I wonder if you can choose between the Bile Sword for better spell casting, or the Plague Bell, which can be used to buff units around it, typically making them faster, but maybe some additional help as well. It's possible that there's a Flail and Bell variant, and a Bile Sword variant, perhaps, though it's most likely that the exalted Great Unclean One just always comes with Bell and Flail. The last screenshot is just a look at a Nurgle-themed battlefield. It looks great, but I doubt there are any mechanics on display here, unless these overlords help spread creep that your units can move faster over or something like that. A very packed trailer today, folks. Lots to look at, and I hope you enjoyed poring over it with me. And if you did, don't hesitate to hit that like button and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you're most excited by. Let me know what you're most curious about. Let me know if you have any thoughts of your own. I'm really quite excited. The only thing I'm kind of uncertain about, I think, is the location of the whole, trailer, I guess. Like, I think that's a pleasure palace of sorts somewhere in the far northern reaches of Dark Elf Holdings or something like that. But I'm really excited to see where things go next. I'm curious to see what units haven't been revealed yet. We know the Soul Grinder of Nurgle and the Soul Grinder of Slaanesh are both probably, somewhere out there. But what else? What else? More cultists? More demons? I'm excited. If you want to follow me in my excitement and in my coverage of Total War Warhammer 3 on the lead up to launch, don't hesitate to subscribe. And as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.